I don't know if I'm back next Thursday or not, because I've got one person who had to go out of town this week, and I don't want to give them back until then. They'll show up on your midterm grades. Okay, so yeah.
Does that say Edward Confessor?
I'm gonna go over all this in a few minutes. Let me start with this. About papers, about studying for exams, all that kind of stuff. Let me start with the second thing first. Studying for exams. How do you do that? How do you do that? Let me put it that way. You just the night before kind of read over, cram. Personal experience, yes, that's exactly how I did it. As an undergraduate, I learned to do things differently as a graduate student. So, one of the things I would suggest doing is every day before class, the few minutes you have before class, unless you're running from parking to get here, spend a few minutes going over your notes. If you don't have any notes, that's a problem. And I have to say that because invariably there are one or two students in every class who literally take no notes. Some people, they can do that if they are primarily oral learners. They hear it and remember it. I was kind of blessed that way. That in reading, I read what I remember. I can tell you, not page numbers, but if I read something, I can say it's in the left-hand column of the page about middle of the way down. Okay? It's not photographic by any means. I do know people who do have the literal photographic memory, and they can tell you what page, what word is the 303rd word on a page. And you go and open that page, count, and it's there. So go over your notes. If you don't take notes, start taking notes. What do you take notes of? And here's why. I think I had it in the syllabus, or if it wasn't in the syllabus, it was an email. There have been about a half dozen studies or so over the last 10 years that pretty conclusively show students who take notes by hand retain the material much better than they do if they're taking it on a computer. If they're taking it on a computer, what they're doing is transcribing. If you're taking it by hand, you're filtering it. And what that means is you're filtering out extraneous, non-essential information. If there's something on the board, I would write it down. Okay. One of my classes, Intro to Lit, sophomore level, the other day, I had spent the day before we had an exam, I don't know, a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, talking about the word protagonist, breaking it down into its two elements, protos, agonist, etc., what each of these mean literally. So I had on the exam, what does protagonist literally mean as discussed in class? Out of 40 students, maybe 5 got it. Because what the other 35, well, if they put anything down, which most of them didn't, because many of them didn't put anything down on the entire exam, what they put down was, main character in a story. Well, that's the typical literary definition. That's not what the exam was specifically asking for, okay? Passages that we discuss in class, I don't know, it seems like we discuss all of everything, but we don't. We actually skip quite a bit. If you were to look at all of Beowulf, and I know Beowulf's long, it's 3,182 lines, we actually probably discussed 50% of that. Now again, that's a lot. That's still 1,600 lines almost, okay? But stuff that we spend quite a bit of time on, I would, make note of that and think that is something to kind of go back over, okay? And then lastly, bear in mind, everything is up on YouTube. So if there's anything you're not sure about, you can go back and recheck that, okay? That's about all I can suggest for studying. I will say, for this class, that first exam is usually the hardest, okay? And one simple reason for that is most of you have never had me in a class before. Those of you who have, probably it didn't help much because it wasn't the same kind of exam as you've had in other classes with me. For example, if you took the Harry Potter course, which a couple of you have, it wasn't objective exams. It was all essay stuff. Okay. You're going to show me your essay chops in the papers you write. Okay. Most of the content in this course, I have. It's going to be all of them. Yeah, I think it is. Will be examined via objective exam, and here's why. I want you to know the material. To be honest, and I'm not supposed to say this because I'm an English professor, and we're supposed to emote, and we're supposed to desire to get out I don't care what you think. Okay, I'll be honest. I don't care what you think about Beowulf. I want you to know the story Beowulf. Why? Because if you know it now, not all the individual aspects, okay? I have to know that because I teach it. You don't need to know, all 3,000 names that are in the poem, etc. But I want you to know the general gist of the poem, who does what to whom, blah, 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 blah. Why? Because that's going to stick with you whether you like it or not for most of your life. And there will come a point in your life, probably when you're a little bit older, that some of what you're doing here will start to percolate down like water through coffee grounds. And it'll click. And you'll start to maybe see connections between what's going on in that work of literature, whatever the work of literature is, and maybe your own life. Because you'll have the rest of your life to think about it. All right? So I want to be sure you know the material. Okay? Secondary sources for papers. What are secondary sources? Let me back up. What are primary sources? The text themselves. That is, the specific things you are writing about. So say, for example, you come to me and you say, Dr. Sherman, I want to write a paper about love in English literature. I'll say, okay, too broad. Because there's been a bazillion books written about love in, so narrow it down. Love in Lanval. The perspective of love, the experience, whatever, okay? So Lanval would be your primary source. Why? Why is it the primary source? What's primary mean? First, chief, because you're writing about it, okay? So that's going to be the thing, ideally, you refer the most to in your paper. Because what does that source become for you in your paper? Leave this realm, college classroom, and imagine instead you're in a courtroom. Close. It's not your witness, it's your what? It's your evidence. It is your evidence. I'm the judge, you're the prosecutor, and you say, this passage of Lanval is Exhibit A. Why does a prosecutor introduce evidence into a court proceeding?
Secure their accusation.
It's proof, right? It's proof. Okay. What can you not have a murder without?
A murder weapon?
Murders.
Close.
Evidence.
What's habeas corpus mean? Produce the body. You can't have a murder unless there's a body. Because what will the defendant say? Where's the body? Prove there's been a murder. You can't prove it unless there's a corpse somewhere. Okay? So, your primary sources are your key bits of evidence. Now, again, it might be a single work. It might be several works. Some of you might decide to write about the experience of love in Shakespeare's sonnets. Okay? Sonnets. That'd be more than one. Or the experience of love in Elizabethan literature. And you can look at Shakespeare and Donne and Ben Jonson and a variety of others. I don't care how you do that. all you need to do in regard to your topic and me is get my approval. And 99% of you will get it immediately. I'll just say, go with it, okay? 1% will maybe I'll have to, help you finesse it a little bit, okay? So then that's the primary source. So secondary source is what?
Sources that write about the primary source.
Things that have been written about your primary source, okay? So scholarly articles, books that have been written about that. And make it easy for you, just about everything we will read in here has hundreds, okay, of articles and or books written about them. If it's Beowulf, you're talking thousands. If it's Shakespeare, millions, okay? Which is why, if you're a graduate student in Elizabethan studies or something, you'd be almost ridiculously stupid to want to write a dissertation on Shakespeare. Because if I were your dissertation director, I'd be saying, really? What are you going to write about that hasn't already been written? Okay? So, secondary sources are those things specifically written about those primary sources. What are tertiary sources then? Because there are such things.
References.
Like?
Historical documents that, historical writings that concern the period or like.
Okay, those can be primary sources. Say you're writing about women's roles in Elizabethan plays or in Shakespeare's plays. Okay, Shakespeare's plays would be primary roles. Okay, historical documents about the role of women in society would also be primary. Reference works like encyclopedias, dictionaries, Gale, Handbook of Literature. Those are all third removed. That's what the primary, secondary, tertiary is referring to. Secondary, tertiary, they're 1 and 2 removes from the primary source. Okay? So your paper, you're required to have 3,000 to 4,000 words, roughly 8 to 10 pages, 8 secondary critical sources. So how are you going to find them? Library. How are you going to find them? Library is a big building. It's got a lot of stuff inside.
The computer's on the library.
Bingo. That's your port of call. Go to the library research gateway. Type in a search string. Love in Shakespeare sonnets. You're going to come up with more than you can deal with. Okay? So what if that source is electronic? Because I say at the bottom of this, do not use websites, internet sites for secondary sources. What does that mean, websites, internet sites?
Like websites about Beowulf?
Wikipedia,
ShakespeareFacts.com.
ShakespeareFacts.com. Wikipedia can be useful. Schmoop? No. Believe me, I've had graduating seniors quoting from Schmoop on their papers. Facts.com? Nope. What are a bunch of the others?
Spark Notes?
Spark Notes?
Yahoo Answers.
Yahoo Answers. Literally, I've had those show up. Okay, don't do that. But
You can use those websites to find sources.
yeah, I mean, you use the websites that show up in the library to find sources, so that if you go to JSTOR and you find an article via JSTOR, that's perfectly good. Why? Because JSTOR doesn't put up crap. Well, I take that back. It does put up crap, but it is quote unquote approved literary scholarly crap. Because, in my opinion, 90% of what is written today is crap. But it is something that's been published first in a journal. Okay? So if it's something that has an actual physical copy somewhere that has then been bought by one of these electronic databases, and almost all I used to edit a journal, almost all journals have been bought by electronic databases so that you can get the actual physical copy, but then you can also get it online. If you can get it online, that's fine. Okay? If you actually are one of those weird, strange people that just wants to go into the library and go into the stacks and start walking down and pulling books out, I know in 20 years there aren't going to be any books to do that. It's all going to be online, which is a huge shame. Okay? I would encourage doing that because it's in going through those books in the stacks that serendipity occurs. Serendipity, that advantageous kind of, what's the word I want? Coming together of all the positive forces in the universe. You're looking for one thing and you find something else. And the something else you find turns out to be perfect. Okay? I say this from personal experience because when I was a doctoral student, we didn't have electronic databases yet. They were just on the cusp. Okay? If you have more questions about papers and stuff, feel free to ask. Okay, so let's get started with a little bit of background to the later Middle Ages. This background covers the whole period that we'll be discussing until we get to the Renaissance. So later Middle Ages, roughly, I know it's 1066, but roughly 1100 to about 1500. Okay? We can actually give a hard and fast date for the end of it if you want. 1485, which I don't have up here, which I should. Which I'll get to in just a moment. So, how does it begin? Well, go back to a little bit of recap. If you watched that introductory lecture that I posted, which I hope you did, all of this is old stuff. Okay? Begins January 1st, 1066, when Edward the Confessor dies. Okay? Edward, notice his nickname, the Confessor. Why is he called the Confessor? Because he was a monk or priest and heard people's confessions? Because that's generally what confessor means. No. It's because he was married and didn't have children. It was thought he was so holy he didn't consummate his marriage with his wife. There are other reasons given for why he didn't have any children, true, but we won't talk about those. Okay? So he dies, and he dies childless. Now let me back up for just a moment. What happened prior to his death? In the 1050s, he had gone to Normandy, and how do I want to put this? He was detained, let's say, by William of Normandy. And the Bio Tapestry, which is a tapestry that records what happened in the Norman conquest, is saying, if I remember right, it's 240 feet long. It's a single piece of tapestry. 240 feet long by about 18 inches wide. Okay? And it records kind of the events of the Norman conquest, beginning with back in the 1050s. So, Edward goes, and he's captured, let's say, or detained by William the Conqueror. And there's a panel in the tapestry that shows Edward on one side of the table, and William of Normandy, on the other side of the table, and they're reaching an agreement. And apparently, unbeknownst to Edward, on the stretchers that go between the legs of the table, keep the legs in tight, they're sitting a Bible. So the agreement that they're making on top of the table is what? It's on the Bible. It's like taking an oath. Okay? What's the agreement? Edward agrees, if I die childless, you, William of Normandy, will become King of England. Okay? Makes that agreement, then he's allowed to leave. Fast forward about 10 years. He dies. And 4 days after his death, or on January 4th, Harold Godwinson is elected king by the Witan. The Witan is the king's counselors. Okay? You said, Kyle, interesting last name there. Godwin's son. Son of Godwin. Well, who is Godwin? Next to the king, he was the most powerful man in England. So, the most powerful man in England arranges it so that his son is elected king. Here's an important little detail. Harold, the son of Godwin, is not the eldest son in his family. He has an older brother who's going to show up right here. Tostig. Tostig. Okay? So, Harold is made king and Tostig leaves. Why? He's angry. Okay? Word reaches William the Conqueror that Harold Godwinson's been crowned king. And he immediately, this is in March, one, is angry, and two, starts preparation for war. How does he start preparation for war? He starts having ships built. He's going to invade. Okay? That's March. He doesn't invade for 6 months. Why? It takes a long time to build a bunch of ships. Okay? So, many months go past. Notice, spring, planting, summer,
Harvest.
not yet. Summer is when everything's in full bloom, full growth. Fall comes, then you have harvest. And on September 25th, 1066, you have what's called the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Stamford Bridge, if I remember correctly, is about 120 miles north of London. Okay? And it's between Harold Godwinson's forces and the forces of Tostig, his older brother, and the person he has allied himself with. Harold Hardrada, H-A-R-A-L-D, Harald, Hardrada, H-A-R-D-R-A-D-A, of Norway. Okay? King of Norway. The last name, by the way, Hardrada, means hard deeds. This is a guy you don't want to mess with.
Which one's he aligned with?
Tostig allies himself with Harold Hardrada. Okay? So, Harold Godwinson, he's king, remember, he's down in London. So what does he have to do when he finds out an invasion force has landed on the northern coast of England and they've kind of set up at Stamford Bridge? Well, he's got to march north with his army. Little tidbit of information you need to be aware of. They did not have a standing army. So he has to raise what's called the Fyrd. F-Y-R-D. The Fyrd. Okay? He has to raise the Fyrd while marching to. You know, what time of year is it again? It's harvest time. So part of the raising the Fyrd is there's an agreement. I am raising the Fyrd. I need you to join my army. Why? So we can defeat this guy up here. This guy up here. Those are the conditions. So, Harold marches north, raises the Fyrd, defeats his brother, Harold Hardrada, at Stamford Bridge. At that point, that army gets to disperse. They've done their job. It's while up here, Harold receives news via post, not post mail, post guy on horseback, several guys on horseback, that William of Normandy has landed on the southern coast. Okay. Well, the southern coast from Stamford Bridge is now about 180, 200 miles away. Guess what Harold Godwinson now has to do? He's got to raise a new Fyrd and march south. Now, he does have a circle of thanes, retainers, if you want, about him. His, what are called housecarls, his household military men, okay? Secret service, essentially, that always go with him. So he does have them. But now he has to raise another army, okay? And he has to march south. 180 miles. Most of the men, the vast majority, are infantry. How long does it take to go 180 miles?
A long time.
It's not something you do in a couple of days. Okay? When I used to backpack, 10, 15 miles a day would be pushing it. Of course, this is in the Sierra Nevadas. England's pretty much flat. But still, takes them a while. So, they marched south, and on October 14th, 1066, you have I put Norman Conquest, but let's give it its real name. The Battle of Hastings. Okay? Which isn't really at Hastings, by the way. Hastings is a little town about 5 miles away from where the battle was. The battle is actually in a town that is today called Battle. They named it after the battle. Right? So you have the Battle of Hastings. And at the Battle of Hastings, again, according to the Bio Tapestry, Harold Godwinson was killed by an arrow striking him through the eye. Okay? Apparently he was a damn fool and looked up as the French longbows, were firing and caught one in the eye. Okay? If you go to battle today, you can go, it is said, to the exact spot that Harold died on. Because at that spot, beginning about a year afterwards, William the Conqueror started building a church, a Norman Abbey, a big church. And that spot was the spot where he placed the altar. Kind of like a, sorry God, shouldn't have killed the previous king, but he had it coming because it was supposed to be mine anyways. If you go there, that abbey is gone. Why? Someone who I've referred to before, Henry the Dirty Rotten Life Scum Bastard. Yeah, Henry the okay? Because he razed most of the churches of medieval England. Okay? So that's October 14th. December 25th, he has himself crowned King of England. Why December 25th?
Christmas?
Okay, yeah, it's Christmas. We all know that. What else? Charlemagne. Charles the Great was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800. How was he crowned? He forced the Pope to do it. Literally forced the Pope. It's kind of like, I'm going to pretend JR is the Pope. Here, Mr. Holy Father, take the crown, I'll give it back. Here. Okay? And he had himself crowned. So, William kind of follows that model. So
was William French or was he?
William was Norman. Norman. He's from Normandy. Okay?
But he had French long then?
Well, yeah, they were French.
Okay.
By that point. Terms. Norman. Not like Norman, what's his name in that movie from the 1960s, Norman Bates. Okay? What does it come from? Northmen. Who are the Northmen? The Norse Vikings. Okay? The area of Normandy, France, the Normandy that, the U.S. and its allies stormed on D-Day, was named after the Norsemen because they settled it. People don't realize how important the Vikings really were. It's from the Vikings that we get the name of our current, one of our two geopolitical foes, Russia. Rus, it comes from Norse. Means red, by the way, because Russians were red-headed. Right? So, Norman comes from Northmen or Norsemen. Normandy is the area, the coastal area of France that they settled in. Right? William the Conqueror was a descendant of Norsemen, but he didn't speak Viking because we're talking a little bit later. He spoke Norman French, a dialect of French. But it's enough of a difference, you could say it's almost a different language than, say, Parisian French. take my history of the English language course next spring. We'll go into a lot about, why we have certain words in English today that mean the exact same thing. It's because of French. Here's an example. How much time do we have? We're doing fine. Warranty and guarantee. They're the exact same thing. One is Norman French, one is Parisian French. Warden, guardian. They're the exact same thing. One is Norman French, one is Parisian French. Then you get gal, or gab, and war. Exact same thing. Okay?
I've never heard that one, Garrett.
Yeah. Like a, you've ever heard the phrase, a nom de guerre? What's it mean? Name of war. That is a name you take for yourself during battle, or during a period of war and such. Okay? Guerrilla, it's not guerrilla warfare, fighting like, apes in Africa, okay? It's guerrilla, okay? A lot of people get that kind of confused. So, 1026 then, the day after, is England at peace? Hell no. It takes William about 20 years to finally, completely, totally subdue the English. How does he do that? Louder.
Stabbing.
Okay, I don't mean how literally does he do it, because, that would be one way to subdue the English.
He conquers all of England
How does he conquer all of England?
by marching several armies through it.
Kind of. He cuts the head off. How do you cut the head off of a country?
By killing its king?
Dukes.
Close. Bingo. Remove the upper class. Remove the nobility. By the end of William the Conqueror, he dies in 1087, the English aristocracy had been entirely killed off. Entirely. Dukes, earls, etc. Duke, by the way, is a later term. Earl would be the term. All the earls were dead. Okay? So you take that upper class, you kill them all, what are you left with?
A lot of empty seats.
Okay, now notice I'm using language that doesn't apply. I'm using anachronistic language, the language of class. Where's that language come from, by the way? Who does it come from? Karl Marx. Okay, Communist Manifesto. Marx is the one who comes up with the different classes. There isn't an upper class and a lower class in Anglo-Saxon England. You have the earls and such, and then you have kind of everybody else. Okay? The everybody else is the group that later get called the middle class and the lower class. So you have, shop owners, you have quote-unquote business people, if you want, and then you have slaves, peasants, people who work the fields, etc., etc. Okay? You take the aristocracy out, and so all you're left with are modern language, the middle class, and the lower class. Well, if you take the aristocracy out, what else did William then do? Nature abhors what? A vacuum. You got to replace that. Why? Because the people down there need what?
Someone to tell them what to do.
Exactly. Somebody to tell them what to do, how to behave. Well, who is that someone? Those who should be above. So one of the things William does is he starts bringing in French nobility. That's when we start to see dukes and barons come in. And they are French. Okay? So the upper class becomes all French speakers. So let's look at the United States, modern day United States. And let's say the same thing were to happen here. Now we don't have as hard and fast a quote unquote class system. Okay? But I don't know what you define as upper class. Some people would define it solely by income. Let's take a random figure. Let's say upper class is everyone who makes $250,000 or more. Personally, I would say it's probably a little high. Maybe it needs to drop down a little bit. Or it might be a little low on some. But $250,000 or more. Take all those people, $250,000 or more, and get rid of them. Okay? And then bring in a bunch of people to replace them that speak a different language.
If every politician spoke Russian, it'd be the same scenario.
Okay, use that. Russia invades. And everybody, not just politicians though, everybody making $250,000 or more is speaking Russian, and we aren't, because I don't make $250,000. Okay? There are some on this campus who do, but not many. What's going to happen?
They're gonna force us to learn Russian.
Are they going to force us to learn Russian? Or do we want to learn Russian? Because we've got to learn to get along with them, especially if we're not the workers of the field, but we're the
Businessmen.
people in the taverns, people in the pubs, people in government, so to speak. Okay? We're going to be wanting to learn Russian. Exact same thing happened. So, the period, I've got it up here somewhere, the period roughly from 1066 to about 1250 is the period of French, both political and linguistic dominance. That is, those in power spoke French. Those not in power spoke English. Okay, I'm not qualifying the English as old or middle. And the reason is because it's changing. It's moving from Old English to Middle English. Okay? We can actually date the first Middle English document. First Middle English document is dated 1137. And that's because we see more elements of Middle English in it than we do of Old English. Called the Peterborough Chronicle. Okay? So, from that period, roughly 1066 to 1250, where what we see, I have this somewhere over here. Yeah, what we see is French, Anglo-Norman French, and some Parisian French, is being borrowed into the English language by English speakers learning French. So they're speaking to French individuals haltingly, slowly, and they're doing what? They're taking terms from French and starting to apply it to their own language. So rather than just having a red cloak, they now add other colors for different shades of red, such as scarlet, vermilion. Okay? They do the same thing with terms of all of culture. So rather than just having a lawyer, what is that really? We all know the word actor, right? The or means what? One who does this. Teach or, even though it's spelled E-R. Write or, even though it's spelled E-R. The E-R ending is all a masculine ending of agency, showing this is a masculine individual doing this, which is why actress is not sexist. The rest on it means what? Feminine thing doing this. So, if we were going to be really logical with our writing, we wouldn't say, Emily Dickinson was a writer. We would say, no, Emily Dickinson was a waitress. Because saying Emily Dickinson, female, is a writer, masculine ending, well, that's just sloppy thinking. Okay? So, where was I going with that? Oh, that's what this is. We throw the Y in there because it's kind of hard to say those two sounds together. Lawyer. You got to have a Y in there. Versus, what did you say, Trevor? Attorney. Attorney is the nice fancy French word. So do you want to be a dumb, hickey, old Woodburyan lawyer? Or do you want to be a nice Nashvilleian attorney at law. Okay, that's kind of the difference. Well, what about, what we eat? You've got Bossy the cow out in the field, but you don't eat cow.
Eat beef.
Because the cow is the living out. You eat beef. Beef. You don't have cow bourguignon, you have beef bourguignon. And in fact, don't only cook the cow, now you can do what to it? You can roast it, and you can come up with all the different ways of cooking. All that language comes from French. Okay? Most of our political terms, judicial terms, come from French. Many of our clothing terms come from French, except for shirt, okay, which is native Germanic, okay. Quite a few others do, okay. So that's what's going on from about 1066 to 1250. After 1250, for some reason, we don't know the exact reason, French is still being borrowed into English, but now it's being borrowed by the French, who are making their way haltingly in English, and when they're trying to come up with a word, but they don't know the English word, they fall back to their French vocabulary. See, pre-1250, it's English speakers bringing French terms into English. Post-1250, it's French speakers bringing French words. In other words, by 1250, English has already won this linguistic war. Okay? It was already dominant again. So let me back up a little bit. To some people. Henry II. Notice I'm skipping a lot between William Conqueror. Henry II. When I've got F's by their name,
That's the one.
that essentially means French, or Anglo-Norman if you want. Okay? Henry II. Well, why do I put him up? Because he's married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she's important. And because of something he says in a drunken stupor that causes Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, to lose his life. Okay? So, Henry II, he's the first Plantagenet king, and then you get a whole series of Plantagenet kings, all the way up through, until Henry Tudor in 1485. Okay? So he marries Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine is a pretty large province in France. So when he marries her, okay, she's the person in charge of Aquitaine, but it's kind of his too. Right? Now, English kings at this time, like Henry II, even though I said he's Anglo-Norman, they considered themselves also to be kings of parts of France, which you can imagine the French king didn't really like very much. Okay? Which we'll get to that when we get to John. So Eleanor of Aquitaine, why is she important? Because it's under her sponsorship, her patronage, that we see the rise in England of the love tradition in poetry, writing about love. It's also during this period, during Henry II's reign and such, that we see the rise of the Arthurian tradition. Okay? For example, 1204, I think it's 1204, Geoffrey of Monmouth writes History of the Kings of Britain, in which we get our first real, meaty discussion of King Arthur. And Arthur is supposedly born in Tintagel, Wales, has his, 10 major battles. We get Lancelot, we get all those guys. Okay? So, I've got Courtney Love written up here and two other names.
Wasn't Lancelot inspired by the Courtney Love?
Yes.
Right, so that
So,
mutual pining.
let me back up and talk about these two names. Talk about Ovid first. Who was Ovid? First century Roman poet. Most famous for his metamorphoses, stories of transformation. Okay? That's where we get some of our great Greek and Roman, goddess stories. Apollo chasing Daphne and she turns into a tree or whatever it is. Okay? See, Ovid also wrote a book called Ars Amatoria. Ars, art, amatoria, of love. The art of love. Problem is, when Ovid is writing that, first century, he's writing satire. Because art of love is all about dirty old men who want to get sexy young women in bed. And it's about dirty old men. What he is satirizing at the time is Rome's sexual preoccupation. I can't help but wonder what he'd write about our day. Okay? But it's satire. And what he includes in there is, all right, dirty old men, here are some great ways to get women in bed. And he gives us rules for what to do and how to do it, etc. Okay? But there's, 1,000 years between Ovid and the translator who translates Ars Amatoria into the art of love. Andreas Capellanus, a monk. And what Andreas Capellanus doesn't realize is that he was writing satire. He takes it to be serious. This is really a how-to, book. Okay? And it's based upon Capellanus' translation of this that the whole courtly love tradition grows and blossoms and flourishes. Okay? Real briefly. In that courtly love tradition, projector on, screen, did you go on? I think you're on. PC, take. So hopefully what is going to show up here in a moment is not just an empty blue screen. No, don't log off. Boy, what timing. So you can't read it very well. Your lights. Kill that 25%. And we'll blow these up a little bit. So, here are just some of these rules of love. Marriage is no real excuse for not loving. In other words, you're married. Don't let that bother you if you love somebody else. Just put that aside. He who is not jealous cannot love. So if there's not jealousy involved, it's not real love. No one can be bound by double love. Love is always increasing or decreasing, and that which a lover takes against his will of his beloved has no relish. In other words, men, don't rape your girlfriends, because then it's just not the same. Boys do not love until they arrive at the age of maturity. Wow, that would really be open for interpretation. What would the age of maturity be? I know some women who would say 30, 35, 40. We do know the male brain doesn't fully form until about 25 or 26, which is pretty interesting when you think about that. When one lover dies, you got to be widowed for at least 2 years. No one should be deprived of love without the very best of reasons. I'm not going to touch that one. What else?
Love is always a stranger in the...
True lover does not desire to embrace and love anyone except his beloved. When made public, love rarely endures. What that means is true love has to be kept secret. That's going to be real important when we look at something like Lanval. Okay? A new love puts to flight an old one. That is, if you can't love the one you want, love the one you're with. Old Stephen Bishop song from the 1970s. Okay? When a lover suddenly catches sight of his beloved, his heart palpitates. That goes the other way too. Her heart palpitates too.
So wait, what does palpitate mean?
What's it mean? Your heart beats fast. It's like, okay.
If love diminishes, it quickly fails and rarely revives.
Jealousy and therefore love are increased when one suspects his beloved. That seems to imply jealousy is what? Good. Okay? Love can deny nothing to love. Put this in 2018 language. You're out on a date. Well, if you really love me. Notice, if it's real love, you can't deny me then. Okay? What a bunch of utter. A true lover is constantly without intermission possessed by the thought of his beloved. Nothing forbids one woman being loved by two, not at the same time, not a menage a trois. Nothing forbids one woman being loved by two men or one man by two women. In other words, it's Tuesday, it's Susan's turn. If it's Friday, it's Nancy's turn. You know? Or it's Tuesday, it's Bob, and if it's Friday, it's Fred. You know?
So everyone's straight.
Well, not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily the case, though the Ars Amatoria was written for men about women. Okay? I will say that. Okay, so let me get rid of this now. Screen.
Every act of a lover ends with the thought of his beloved. Oh, that just
I'll send this to you, or I'll put it on D2L because it's pretty interesting.
I can see how
In
that could create some
1381,
problems.
what does that say right there? Something revolt.
Peasants
1381.
Revolt.
Peasants Revolt. We'll get to that in a minute. So, the courtly love tradition, at its heart, because you saw, marriage isn't important, and if you are married, it's not an impediment. At its very heart, it's adulterous. Because one of the things that it also says is, marriage isn't necessarily what love is about. Okay? Love's about passion. Marriage, that's about rights. That's about property. That's about inheritance. That's about legal stuff. Okay? Love's about passion. All right? Well, that then presents some problems for society. Eleanor of Aquitaine apparently believed this stuff to such an extent she had a quote-unquote court of love established in the royal court. And there were priests of love. Okay? You can see how the literature that comes out of that would really be celebrated then. You know, Kyle mentioned Lancelot. Look at some of the great courtly lovers in the history of English literature. Lancelot and Guinevere. Tristan and Isolde. Okay? Both of those are adulterous affairs. What about Romeo and Juliet? Nope, it's not courtly love. You don't have any of the adulterous aspect, though you do get some of the other qualities. Okay? Let's go on real briefly. So after Henry II comes his son, Richard I. This is the one nicknamed the Lionheart, Richard Coeur de Lion. Okay? Reigned for 10 years. This is the Richard that shows up in the Robin Hood tales. Like the one who's going to set things right when he comes back to England. He ruled for 10 years. He only lived in England 6 months of that entire 10-year reign. He didn't speak a lick of English. So where did he spend his other 9.5 years? Off crusading. Okay? His younger brother, upon his death, becomes king. This is John I. And if you're familiar with the Disney version of Robin Hood, you got that great song about John I.
John the Worst.
John the Worst. Okay? Why is he such a bad king? Is it because he's after Robin of Locksley? Well, according to the ballads that come later, yeah, partially. But no. Here's why. Because of what happens in 1204. It's down here at the bottom. 1204, John loses the Duchy of Normandy to the King of France. Now, what is Normandy to John? It's home. Yeah, it's the fatherland. It's home. He loses home to the King of France. Okay? Notice, it's not too long before this date. As a result, okay, the Anglo-Norman upper class of England start to put more of their eggs in the English chicken basket than in the French basket, so to speak. Okay? Starts to revive some English nationalism. 1215, John is forced to sign MC, Magna Carta. Why is it called Magna Carta? What's Magna mean? The Great Charter. Why is it the Great Charter? Why is it a foundation of the United States legal system?
It limits the powers of monarchy.
It limits the powers of the king. It gives powers and rights not to all people, but primarily the nobility. It institutes, for example, trial by jury of one's peers. That word peer has a very literal meaning. To be a peer in England today means what? You're a member of the House of Lords. Okay? So a jury of your peers means those of your social status. See, you wouldn't have a duke or baron tried by a jury of peasants. Why? Not their peers.
But a peasant could be judged by peasants.
Peasants could be judged by peasants.
But then who would judge the king?
Well, nobody would. King is above judgment. In practical reality, according to Magna Carta, the king could be judged by the dukes and nobles because they're closest to. Okay? And then there's a bunch of other things. You know, if you're arrested, you have to be charged. You can't be arrested and charged 10 years later. Okay? And a variety of other things. He's followed a few years later by Edward I, 1272 to 1307. Okay? Why is Edward I important? Why do I put him down?
He's not French.
He's the first Anglo-Norman king. He's Plantagenet. He's descendant of all these guys to learn English. First one to learn English. This Edward, by the way, if I remember correctly, is the one who has the nickname Longshanks. Long legs. If you saw Mel Gibson's Braveheart,
Freedom!
that's the one the Scots are fighting against. Okay? He was hated by the Scots. He still is. I mean, Scots still really, really hate him. Okay? But he's the first one to learn English. He loved, according to all accounts, the English. And they pretty much loved him. Okay? 1250 we've talked about. Go up a little bit farther. 1381 you have the Peasants Revolt. Why are the peasants revolting? I don't mean that they're personally revolting, but they're revolting against... Why are they revolting? Because there have been certain laws passed by Parliament that raise prices that they can't meet, that change work conditions and such, and so they march on London. Literally. You can go to Runnymede, where there was a battle. They march on London. Richard II essentially says, okay, I'll listen to your, okay, and does, and then he has them slaughtered. Well, what has happened between there and here? Mid-1300s, 1340s, 1350s, there's a little outbreak of...
The middle class?
No, that comes as a result of Black Plague, bubonic plague, okay? Sweeps across Europe, not just England. And the best estimates are that anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4 of the population of Europe dies. The United States has roughly 350 million people. 1/3 of that, 110, 115 million. So take California, Florida, and Texas. Wipe them away. That's a lot of people. Okay? Take their 1/3 to 1/4. That's a lot of people. So what happens when that many people die? And where are they dying?
In the peasantry.
Not necessarily in peasantry. Cities. Plague spreads by what?
Fleas and rats.
No.
People get it from the rat's fleas. People spread it how?
Coughing. Season.
Coughing. Bodily fluids. Sneezing, coughing, expelling stuff from your body stuff. So when you live packed in tight cities, go to even New York, it's not the same as going to a town in Europe. Go to Prague, go to London, go to Berlin, and compare those with American cities. American cities grow like this. European cities grow like this. They grow up. Okay? You pack more and more and more people into smaller areas. So, disease and illness spreads very easily, especially when, like in London, you have a house, and then you add on top of that, you add on top of that, you add on top of that, and every time you add on top, what do? You create an overhang. So, first floor looks like this, second floor hangs over, next hangs over a little bit more. Why do you have that hangover? Anybody know?
That's floor space.
So that here, your window, you throw your bedpan out at night and empty it. Where? Literally into the street. And when you're up here, you do the same thing, but you don't want to pour it on your neighbor's head below you. And then here you do, and all that ends up in this little gutter in the middle of the street. Okay, well, that's another reason why disease and such spread. So, the mass of people die in the cities. Well, what happens if a mass of people die in Nashville? Just take Nashville example and have everybody gone, or 1/3 of the people gone. Well, what happens to quote unquote business? But the need for business doesn't die. People still have to be able to go to the bakery. People still need to be able to go to the pub and have a beer. People still need to be able to go to a blacksmith and have things made. So,
Scarcity rises.
you get scarcity, nature abhors a vacuum. People start to leave from the fields and going into the cities, learning new trades, and you get the rise of the middle class. That's when the middle class begins, as a result of the Black Plague. Okay? Chaucer, mid-1340s, dies in 1400. And then I'll talk about the literary revival later. Literary revival, 1350 to 1375. Okay? What is that? It's an attempt to revive the Old English alliterative pattern. But they really suck at it. They do a horrible job. Okay, Marie de France. Who is Marie de France? We know almost literally nothing about her. Okay? She shows up here. She's writing during the reign of Henry II. Okay? She writes a series of what are called I meant to bring that book. I forgot to. Breton lays. S there makes it plural. Breton lays. Why Breton?
Britain?
They're in the Breton language, which is the form of Celtic spoken where? Not in Britain. In Brittany. Okay? Which is a province of France, across the English Channel, south of Cornwall. The E on it means Little Britain. The people who settled Brittany were originally Britons, Britons, who left Britain, Britain, when the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes began invading. They fled from them and established a new culture, if you want. Okay? So she speaks Breton, and she writes in Breton, which is why in your edition, or in your book, you've got the French version, it's a form of French, on the one side, and you have the English on the other. Okay? Turn to Lanval. 188, 89. We won't finish we might. Probably won't finish Lanval today, but we'll get close. Starts on 188. Okay. It's an Arthurian tale.
Hooray.
It's set in Arthur's kingdom. It's not the only tale we have about Lanval. There are several others. And it begins with Arthur and his knights at Carlisle. Okay? The gloss tells you North England, close to the western end of Hadrian's Wall. That, geographically, that's Hadrian's Wall is kind of like the border dividing England from Scotland. Hadrian built that wall for one purpose. In the late 2nd century AD, 170s or so, to keep the Scots and Picts out. Okay? Because they were harassing the Roman legions. So he built it to keep them out. Carlisle is one of the places, supposedly, that is the basis for Camelot. There are several places that are supposed to be Camelot. We have no idea if there ever really was a real Camelot. So Arthur and his knights are all gathered together, and we're told it's Pentecost. Feast of Pentecost takes place 7 weeks after Easter, mid to late May, possibly early June. Why? It changes every year because the date of Easter changes every year. Okay? In Arthurian literature, every year the Knights of the Round Table gather at Pentecost and they re-swear what's called the Pentecost Oath. And this oath is essentially, I would argue, not everyone would agree with this, but it's essentially kind of a medieval version of what Christ talks about in Matthew 25 in his parable of the Last Judgment. Where he talks about there will be sheep and goats, and the sheep will go to my right hand, the goats will go to my left hand, and the sheep will be people who feed the hungry, care for the poor, help the widows, visit those in prison, give a cold glass of water to somebody who's thirsty, help orphans, etc. And the goats will be those who don't do any of those things. And the people who did do those things, Christ says, will say, Lord, when did I do this to you? And he says, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these. Okay? Talking about everybody. So the Pentecost oath is, we will help the poor, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, help widows, save, damsels in distress, that kind of thing. Also part of that is, we're not going to rape women. Okay, this is Middle Age. We're not going to rape women. We're not going to kill people willy-nilly, just, going around. This is important. There were actually laws in the Middle Ages that only certain people could go around in society with swords. Knights, for example. Everybody else, no. And the knights, even for specific reasons. It wasn't an open carry, society, so to speak. So, they have all these knights there, and Arthur is sharing out wives and other stuff. It doesn't mean they're wife swapping. It means he's, to the single knights, he says, you can have this girl. Yep, very patriarchal and all that kind of stuff. And there's this one knight there named Lanval. Notice Lanval is not what? He's not from around these parts. He's a foreigner. Okay? He is a king's son, but his father lives elsewhere. He's of high lineage. He's part of the king's household. That is Arthur's household. Not all the knights of the Round Table live in Arthur's house. Lanval does. It's almost like he's a foster son to Arthur. Almost like. I'm not saying he is. Okay? But Lanval is unhappy. Why? How does Arthur treat him? I don't know what to do with you. A foreign man without support, very bottom of page 188. A foreign man without support is very sorrowful in another land when he does not know where to seek help. Okay. The knight of whom I'm telling you, who had served the king so well, got on his horse one day, went off to enjoy himself. So, let me back up a little bit. Back up to line 15. To the members of the round table, they had no weak in all the world. He shared out wives and land among all except one who had served him. Lanval. Arthur's giving wives and land to all the other knights, but not Lanval. And yet we're told Lanval serves him. For his valor, his generosity, his beauty, his prowess, most people envied him. They wanted to be like Lanval. Many a one pretended to love him. And that's when we find out king's son, all this kind of stuff. So, he's not being favored at all by Arthur. So one summer day, gets on his horse, rides out into the fields. Now, little word of warning, if you ever find a TARDIS and you ever decide to go back in time to the Middle Ages, if you're Doctor Who fans, and you come upon, some place and there's a horse and there's a meadow, and in the meadow runs a brook, and there are some trees in the meadow. Never, ever, ever get on the horse, ride out to the meadow, get off the horse, lie down next to a tree, and fall asleep by the babbling brook. Because invariably, in Middle English literature, what always will happen is you will be abducted by the fairies. Call this medieval alien abduction, which is what some modern alien abduction people think is really happening in these tales. I mean, they're completely
Crazy.
bet you know what crazy, yeah. Okay, I'm much more with the medieval and some English folks who say there's more likelihood of the little people being real than of the green people being real. Anyways,
Dwarves, right?
well, they're not dwarves,
Fairies.
fairies or leprechauns, according to some versions. So he goes off, he lies there, falls asleep, or almost falls asleep, and he sees two maidens suddenly appear. And they walk down along the edge of the brook,
Danger.
and we're told the elder, line 61, carried basins of gold, fine and well made. The other carries a towel. Why? They're just two chicks walking through the forest. One carrying a basin, the other one carrying a towel, just giving baths to, whatever. I wish Monty Python had done something with this, because it would have been absolutely hilarious. So, they come to where he's lying. Lanval, notice, who was very well bred, got to his feet to meet them. Why did he get to his feet? Because he was very well bred. Well, that's a non sequitur. Why did he get to his feet? What does being well bred have to do with anything?
He's chivalrous.
He's chivalrous. There's a term we haven't talked about. So what does to be chivalrous mean? Because literally, chivalrous has to do with riding a horse. Chevalier. Well, it's part of the heroic, knightly, noble ideal or code. What else does it get at? Where would Lanval be if he weren't out in the forest right now?
In court.
In court. What word do we get from court?
Courtroom.
Courtship.
Courtly. Courtship. What else? I know it's a word that's fallen out of favor in our society because we don't give a damn, it seems to be anymore, for courteous or courtesy. He is showing courtesy to these two women. Film with Antonio Banderas and Julia Stiles? Can't remember. And I can't remember the title of the film.
What, Nice 10?
It's about dancing.
Oh.
It's about a high school teacher in New York. He's actually not a high school teacher, he's a dance instructor. It's a true story, by the way. And he lives in the inner city, and he sees, that these kids are just have horrible lives. And he comes up with this idea of, I want to teach them how to dance. Ballroom dancing. Okay? And he goes in, there's this great scene, he goes into the principal's office, and the principal's Alfred Woodard, I think. And he goes in, and he's sitting outside in the outer office, and there's a couple kids being sent to the principal, sitting next to him, and one of the secretaries walks in. He stands up, takes his hat off. She sits down, he sits down. Another lady comes in, he stands up. And the guy next to him's like, dude, what are you doing? And he explains to him courtesy. He goes, if you want a number, just ask for a number. He goes, no, that's not it at all. Okay? And I can't remember, take the last dance or something like that. Anyways, what it comes down to, what the film is portraying is teach the students ballroom dancing. And what are you actually teaching them? Through the process of learning how to control themselves, their movements, their speech, their actions, you're teaching them self-respect. And if they respect themselves, then what else do they respect? Others. Okay? That's what courtesy is all about. Respect for others. So he is showing, because he's well bred, because he's been bred in a courteous society, he stands up. And they say, notice, who are you? Lying in our wood. Nope. Sir Lanval, my lady, who's most noble, wise, and beautiful, sends us for you. Come along. Notice, that's not a request. That's a command. We'll take you there safely. Look, the pavilion is right close by. He goes with them. Notice he forgets about his horse. They lead him up to the tent. And we get a comparison. Not Queen Semiramis, you've got a gloss down there, when she had her greatest wealth and greatest power and greatest wisdom, nor the Emperor Octavian could have had a tent like that. Could have bought the right flap. Okay, so this lady's tent is sumptuously expensive. Let's use modern language. Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos together couldn't have bought this tent. Okay? Golden eagle set on top. What does that symbolize?
Roman Empire.
Kingship.
Royalty. Royalty. Okay? So he goes in, and there's the maiden. 94. She surpassed in beauty the lily or the new rose when it appears in summer. Why the lily and the rose? Why? Louder?
White and red,
Okay. Why white and red?
virtue and passion.
Purity, virtue, and passion. Love. She lay on a very beautiful bed. Sheets were worth a castle. Okay, castles took scores of years to build, and one of her sheets is worth more than a castle. We're not in Kansas anymore, right? I mean, she lay on a very beautiful bed. The sheets were worth a castle, in nothing but her shift. What does nothing but her shift mean? What's a shift? It's not like a job shift change.
It's like an evening gown.
What's the difference between an evening gown and a nightgown?
See-through.
One's a lot more revealing. Exactly. She's wearing a nightie. Okay? See-through. How do I know? Her body was very elegant and comely. Yeah, well, Lanval wouldn't see her body if it weren't visible through her shift. She had thrown on for warmth a costly mantle of white ermine. Again, another symbol of royalty. Okay? That's when you see pictures, kings and queens, and they've got white with the little black flecks in it. That's ermine, or ermine if you want to pronounce it that way. Lined with Alexandrine silk again. Her side was entirely uncovered, her face, her neck, and her breast. She was whiter than hawthorn blossom. So she's got this shift on, and she's covered with white ermine because she's cold, and yet her side, her face, her neck, and her breast are entirely uncovered. Well, what is an ermine or ermine?
It's like a
Shoulder
little
wrench.
animal looking thing. It's like a mammal. It's
Well, it definitely is a mammal.
No, it's like a big fluffy thing that goes around the shoulder, right?
Yeah, but it's made out of dead critters. What kind of critter? It's like a weasel,
It's like a weasel. Yeah.
long and slender, or ferret. Okay? But this is probably made out of more than one. But the implication is this thing is long and slender. She put it up. Where is she wearing this thing? Because most of her is exposed. So he goes forward and she says, Lanval, take a seat. Keep in mind, what's the king been giving out?
Wives.
Wives and land. She says, Lanval, handsome friend, for you I have come out of my own land. Well, what is her own land?
The Fey Kingdom.
Fairyland. Okay? Which we don't know where that is. It's the Celtic otherworld. And she tells him, if, notice, you are valiant and courteous. That is kind of if you play the courtly love game, because those knights who were involved in courtly love had to be valiant. See, in the courtly love tradition, let's say you had a castle, and at the castle rules a knight, and the knight has a wife. She's the lady. Okay? And the knight has beneath him a bunch of other knights. In the courtly love tradition, it's kind of like the job of those knights that are beneath the knight to try to woo the knight's lady, to win her favor. Okay? That's why the rule said, she can have more than one lover, not her husband. Husbands aren't for love. Wives aren't for love. But she could have one or two knights. Okay? So, if you're valiant, if you really are a knight, and if you're courteous, you show the right proper behavior, no emperor, count, or king ever had such joy or good fortune. In other words, I will show you a good time. I don't mean to be facetious. That's what the poet is getting at. You think this is bad, wait till we get to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Okay? For I love you more than anything.
Just met.
Yeah. But notice, they know who he is. He looks at her, saw she was beautiful. Love stings him with a spark that lights and inflames his heart. Probably other parts of his body as well. He replies, beautiful one. Why doesn't he name her?
Doesn't know her name.
He doesn't know her name. Talk about a one-night stand that, turns out well. Is she ever named? No. Never. If it please you that such joy should come to me, that you should wish to love me, you could command anything that I would not do to the best of my power, be it folly or wisdom. Perfectly in line in the courtly love tradition. Give me a command, and I will do it if it's within my power. Now, theoretically, could she command him?
Kill Arthur.
Kill Arthur. You kind of go, damn. Okay.
I'll try.
Because that would be folly. That would not be wisdom. I will do what you command. For you, I will give up everyone. Father, back home. Arthur, well, he doesn't have to give up much there. I never wish to part from you. This is what I most desire. She hears him speak, the one who could love her so well. She grants him her love, notice, and her body. Why does she grant both? What's the difference between her love and her body?
Loyalty versus having a good time.
Body is sex. Let's be blunt. What's her love? Is it just her affection? Or is there more of a mental, intellectual / spiritual connection? I am yours. What's the next part of the phrase? Body and soul. Okay? I think that's what's being implied there. and we're done. Okay, we'll pick up with that, and
Always good to leave on.
we won't finish it. I mean, it won't take real long to finish. So start, I think it's the Cigar on the Green Light next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get the first however many lines of Cigar on the Green Light done. We're going to get behind again.